Hello, everyone. Good morning. We thought we'd start a little bit early. I know it's 10 minutes early. We're not starting the masterclass proper just yet, but we thought it'd be a good opportunity for those of us who are early birds, like all of you who are currently attending. If you had any questions about the past two masterclasses or any areas that you think might be useful for some discussion, we have some time now before we start proper and while we wait for everyone to join. So please feel free to write any questions you might have in the Q&A. I will, however, just make one small request. Because I know there was a lot of excitement around mood learning, I do want to say a few things about it later when we start formally. But I think because it's such a new and exciting space, I won't take any questions because I wouldn't know very, very much more than what I presented to you yesterday. So if there are any other questions related to anything we covered in the past 2 days, please feel free to ask in the Q&A. And good morning and welcome, everyone. I note that there are some comments about the quiz and not being able to complete it or submit it. I suspect that a lot of that has got to do with the actual app that you're using, because it's a Google form. And so if you're on a Mac device, there is a good chance that it might not work very well. So I would, if possible, request that you complete the quiz using an Android device. That would be great. So like I said, we won't answer any questions about mood learning, only because, like I said, there really isn't more than that I can comment on or give you than what was covered yesterday. Modular teaching, great. There is a question by Sunita over here about modular teaching and another one on metacognition. I'll address a few of those. So modular teaching is I guess be very careful with the definition of it, because on one hand, it might sound like it's a university style where every course is delivered in a semester. Once you're done, that's it. You don't visit it ever again. So modular teaching is not necessarily that. Modular teaching is basically breaking down existing workloads that our students would typically do into smaller bite-sized pieces. That is in response to our understanding of how their attention spans are evolving and changing because of the overwhelming amount of information out there, they're getting easily distracted. And so when lessons are packaged in short little bite-sized pieces in a sequential order that has some logic to it, the benefit of that is, firstly, as I progress from one module to the next, as a student, you feel a great sense of achievement as you are able to understand one after the other. It also gives the student an opportunity for deep and reflective learning, because they complete a small module, they stop, they pause, they reflect. They could even complete some questions on a worksheet related to the module, and then they start on the second one. You will find a lot of courses today, both at the university level and also at the like what's very popular now are these short courses, hot courses, or micro masters. You will find that most of them are, again, packaged in that modular way. The second question that I saw a while ago was on metacognition and what that actually is. So a simple way to think of metacognition is, so cognition in itself is all of the processes that you are conscious about when you are learning at any one point in time or doing something. So any form of behavior is always oftentimes attached to cognition in some shape and form. Now, metacognition is actually a lot of the other processes, biological processes, physiological processes, biochemical processes that are happening that we are not necessarily conscious of. So writing has been implicated as an effective way to boost metacognition, because when you write, yes, you might be writing actively what you're actually writing, but what we don't realize is subconsciously that action and that practice of writing those specific words or phrases are actually getting imprinted in some shape and form, such that when we revisit the subject matter again, whether it's in a written setting or whether it's in a conversational setting, we are able to recall that information a lot more efficiently. And that is the benefit of metacognition, and I guess finding ways that improve metacognition. Thank you for your positive comment, Manisha, about using the video library or the video diary. So very shortly, I will be, when we start today's masterclass proper, there's actually a little resource that I have to share with you on how you can, I think it shows maybe some of the tips when you're actually filming a video diary, okay? Okay, let me see if there are any other. So there is one little thing about mood learning here that I will just clarify, and you're not entirely wrong. There was a comment about mood learning. Is that you know, learning in a calm state of mind? I think that's part of it, but again, we don't have evidence, very much evidence for that. And I guess mood learning is new in a sense where we're starting to tackle and starting to understand what are some of the situations that actually elicit the best learning. And that is a combination of three things demonstrated by that pyramid. So after we get raw information, there are basically three things that need to be checked for that information to be relevant to the receiver. So on one hand, there is that potency and control, which is essentially you and your own personal rank of importance, and also on the other hand, your emotional construct. So how do you feel about the subject matter? And thirdly, your physical state of being, which does not necessarily need to be a calm state. Of course, that is beneficial, but we, like I said, don't know very much about this. And I would argue that you could be in different states that not necessarily calm for effective learning. I know for certain that when you are, say, in a physical education class and, you know, actively doing stuff, if you're learning something kinesthetic, then there's no way you might learn it in a calm manner, right? Or if you're an artist or a musician, you know, oftentimes when you are, you know, rocking with a band and learning, you know, about music, then that's not necessarily a calm state of mind. So we'll still need to find out a lot more. So this is again new frontiers, if you like. Okay, we're almost on the dot to start, and I can see that almost everyone has joined us. If you have just joined us, welcome everyone. We will get started with the masterclass very shortly. What I was doing was taking some of the questions that you might have that we didn't have a chance to address. But in the interest of time, we might start getting ready for today's masterclass. And then if there are even further questions, we'll try and get through some of them today, because today's session I'm hoping won't take too long. And then of course, don't forget that tomorrow I have dedicated a good amount of time to take care of as many questions as I can. And I also do hope that our relationship doesn't end with the masterclass, and hopefully I get an opportunity to see everyone again, and also maybe keep in touch. Okay. One more thing before we start proper, and again, we'll make this announcement very, very clearly now. There seems to be a lot of issues with the quiz, but I have just checked on my end that more than 420 people have given a response, so it's gone through. If you are facing difficulties with the quiz, there is a good chance that that is a device issue. Because the quiz is in Google Forms, you really need to use it in an Android device. If you're on a Mac, it might play up a little bit. So if possible, I request that you access the quizzes on an Android device.
Dr. G?
Okay, yes.
Just one second. Hi, good morning. I just wanted to take your permission. Can we delete the Q&As right now, because you'll face a little problem, after this. So do I have your permission?
Yes, sounds good. I think we delete the questions that are currently there. Sorry, everyone, if we didn't get through to your questions, but I promise you there will be time later today and tomorrow as well. Thank you all again very much, and welcome once again. I also got some feedback about the audio quality. Yesterday was better than Monday, but every time I moved my head and I was looking at my other screen, it faded out. So today I forced myself, I've unplugged the second screen, and I have only one screen, and that's it. Okay, so I'm going to start the masterclass. Welcome everyone, and good morning. Welcome to our third masterclass together. Time flies, doesn't it? My goodness, we're already on day 3 and coming to a close tomorrow. So I just wanted to give everyone some announcements as usual, and then we'll go right into today, which will, I guess, shine a spotlight on a little something we call authentic assessment. There is a good chance that you're already doing this, but there are opportunities here again for us to become creative and find even more effective ways of assessment. So you remember on Monday, we started with the definition of how we might describe the modern learner and the modern teacher. Some of those definitions have applied for the last few years, and some are relatively new, particularly again in an age where digital technology is the focus, and there are lots of ways in which a student can get overwhelmed with information and easily distracted. We define them as a needs-based learner, and then some of the prospects for us as teachers adapting to those changes in learning styles. Yesterday, we focused on work-integrated learning and how that is a very, very relevant thing to do in the classroom today. The closer we get to work relevance, the higher the chances a student is able to learn more effectively. And then we introduced the concept of mood learning, which is a really, really exciting space, and hopefully a space that we can learn even more about in time to come. I'll say a few words shortly about that. Now today, we move on to another thing that we could think about doing a little bit differently, and that is assessment. Okay, excellent. So here we go. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. And as usual, I'm going to now turn off my video just so I don't chew through everyone's bandwidth, because we have several hundred people joining us today. And so I'm going to switch off my video so that you have as smooth an experience as possible. So in today's session, we are looking at authentic assessment. We'll define that shortly. But again, I want to welcome first and foremost our extended family joining us on YouTube. In the chat group now, we will share with you the YouTube link for today's session. The YouTube link will allow other people outside of the immediate community here on Zoom to also enjoy and benefit from these sessions. So please share this link with your teachers, but we will make an announcement again that only you that have registered for the Zoom sessions are eligible for the certificate. Okay, so please definitely share the link on the chat group now with your colleagues. We want as many teachers to benefit from the experience as possible. A reminder that the quizzes need to be completed, and I saw a few comments that they do work on Apple devices. So it might just be a device issue. If you have issues completing the quiz, may I please suggest that you simply try it out on another device? That would be helpful. We've just put a deadline for the quizzes. it would be easier if you complete them straight away after each session. But don't worry if you are busy. We understand everyone is busy. Please feel free to complete the quiz by Sunday, because we will be processing these certificates next week. So there's a bit of time, but please complete them. And remember that we are using your email address as the unique identifier. And we will check based on your email address that you have completed all 3 quizzes, 2 that we've already done, and today is the 3rd and final quiz. And you have to complete all 3 quizzes in order to become eligible for our completion certificate. I wanted to show you yesterday's quiz performance, which was great. So on average, people scored 8.12 out of 10. Well done, everyone. There are more resources. There's one that I promised you from yesterday. We talked a little bit more about play-based learning, and people were asking for resources. I found another one, which is an Australian one on STEM learning with a lot of digital learning activities. So check out Star Portal. Most of the stuff there, I believe, is free. So please feel free to check it out. There was also a lot of interest when we talked about how you could integrate work-relevant activities in class, and one of those activities being a video diary. I wanted to share even more ideas with you. Firstly, here is a good article. Again, don't worry about writing this down. You can't click on the screen either because this is a PowerPoint slide. It's not linked to your screen. But don't forget that there is that repository of all of these resources. You can download a PDF copy of the slides and click on the link there. There is an article that I really like, which gives you some general tips on how you can make the video diaries. And there's actually a paper which I've uploaded again into that folder. This is a formal paper, but I wanted to show you some qualitative and quantitative evidence of, and I guess an evaluation of using video diaries in primary school mathematics. So those of you who are teaching at the primary school level or teaching mathematics might be interested in how these researchers, also from an Australian university, were able to evaluate the use of video diaries in mathematics. I guess the other question is, what is the apps or technology out there? Personally, I don't know of any video diary specific apps. Some of you might actually know of some resources. Here in my School of Biological Sciences, we've done a few of these simply using phone apps. So WhatsApp, as you know, is something that a lot of people around the world use. It's relatively secure, and it's not like you're sharing any information that's personal. So we can form very easily chat groups in WhatsApp for each of our smaller classes, and we can design assessment, including video diaries that require students to submit a video or a short recording. I did want to share with you something that we did this semester because of coronavirus. We had to change some of our assessment pieces to make it more suitable for remote learning. And this, you can see, is your recorder in your phone, which just is recording only the audio. Most phones have a recorder in some shape and form. And what we did for our Masters of Conservation Biology students, as you know, conservation biology has a lot of scientific rigor, but it is equally as important for a conservation biologist to be able to communicate some of those concepts to the general public. So the way in which you do that is obviously going to be very different than if you were communicating the same information to a fellow scientist. And so we gave our master's students an assignment this year that required them to provide a recording and send it in for assessment. The recording could not exceed 2 minutes, because oftentimes we like to challenge them when we say, imagine you're in a lift and you're right in front of a politician and you've got 2 minutes. What would you say? Or if you're on the radio and you're being interviewed, you've only got 2 minutes to respond to a question, what would you say? So we designed some assessment around that kind of scenario where they could see the relevance because it's work relevant, right? There could be a situation in the future where they are actually asked something on the spot with only 2 minutes to respond. Perhaps this is an idea that you might find useful for your own class as well. So today we're going to focus on authentic assessment. It's not a very long session because there's an activity that I'd like for you to participate in. It's an optional activity, but those of you that participate, I'm hoping that you can find it useful if you actually do something with me. We'll talk about that shortly. I did want to address the mood learning again. I know that it caught you all with a lot of excitement, which is very, very positive to me because I'm equally as excited. But like I said, what I presented to you yesterday, I probably don't know very much more than what was presented yesterday. But you did note that in the slide where I showed that emotional triangle, the pyramid, I also did reference a book by Bronwyn Cribb. Bronwyn is actually one of my colleagues who also teaches at the university, but Bronwyn has retired. Bronwyn is someone I describe as very, very multi-talented because by training, she, like me, we're entomologists, and her primary area of research has always been sensory systems in insects. So how do insects see the world? And for insects, it's a very chemical experience. And she's extended her love and passion of sensory systems to humans, moods, and learning. So that book, Design Your Mind by Bronwyn Cribb, is really an exploration of new frontiers in how we can capitalize on our understanding of mood and our feelings in order to become better versions of ourselves. And that can include how we as teachers modify our learning environment in order to create a mood in our students that maximizes their learning. So I promise you that I will talk to Bronwyn, and maybe there is the possibility in the future that we can collaborate once again with Trade and Investment Queensland and ScooNews, and maybe we can bring to you another series of masterclasses focused specifically on how you can design your mind. And maybe some of that will be relevant for your own practice. Okay, so I just wanted to say that. So today is authentic assessment, and tomorrow is really a summary. I think, will be joined again by our Trade and Investment Queensland Trade Commissioner, Mr. Gitesh, to close our masterclass series. But more importantly, tomorrow is not as formal as today in terms of what we cover. What I wanted to do tomorrow, on top of taking all of the questions that you might have, is I wanted to give you an opportunity to use a framework that we use here in our university on how you can evaluate your practice. So how you might undergo an appraisal with your seniors or an appraisal with your principals, using a very, very robust and rigorous framework in order for you to really, really benefit and improve upon your practice. The key points from yesterday was that there are very, very creative ways that we can integrate work relevance. And we can do this in 3 ways. I offered you 3 ideas. Our lesson plans can be revised to include work relevant terms. Our in-class activities could be revised to simulate work relevant activities or improve work relevant skills. And finally, we can rewrite assessment criteria so that students have a bit more flexibility in the way in which they respond to the criteria, because such is the nature of the workplace. A workplace is not going to give you marks on content and communication. A workplace is going to give you marks on how you demonstrate your knowledge base, your application of your knowledge, your motivation, and your enthusiasm. And of course, we did talk about mood learning offering very exciting prospects for future teaching and learning. So what is authentic assessment? We have a very, very simple definition. And I guess authentic does not mean it needs to be work relevant. So there's a little bit of overlap from yesterday, but something that's authentic is not necessarily something that you will do in the workplace. Okay, so it doesn't have to be that. Authentic assessment is a way in which we can measure accomplishments in our students that meet one of these three criteria. As long as the assessment is worthwhile, it is significant, and it is meaningful to the student, then that really is authentic assessment. So today I'm going to bring you two ideas, and what the best way for me to do that is actually bring you into my classroom. I hope you're ready to experience what some of my students might experience in my classroom today. So obviously, as teachers in high schools, we face a challenge where we know the best learning takes place out of the classroom, but oftentimes we don't have the resources to take our kids out of the classroom. We need to bring the outside inside into the classroom. And so I'm going to demonstrate. Imagine this as a demo class. Obviously, you would have done it face-to-face with me, not in a virtual space, but hopefully you pick up some of the learning points and activities that we're about to do. So I hope you are ready to join me in the field. This was me not too long ago, and some of my research, very, very fortunately, and a privilege for me, has taken me outside of Australia. This here is a developing nation in the Pacific region called Samoa. And I do a little bit of work in helping subsistence farmers, small-scale farmers, grow their crops in a more sustainable way. That really is my primary research outside of teaching. Okay, so I'm going to teach you, I guess, a little bit about insects. I hope you don't get too freaked out, because insects, in my opinion, are incredibly interesting. But if you are not a biology teacher, don't worry, because you're not paying attention necessarily to the content, but you are paying attention to the delivery. Okay, so imagine you are attending a class, and the activity we're about to do gives you an idea of a way in which you can take something outside of the classroom inside your classroom. And we do this by using very, very powerful imagery. So I wanted to talk to you about invasive ants. They're all around the world, and as the name suggests, if they're invasive, it means that they are outside of their natural range. And in the context of Australia, there are two species that are particularly a big issue. But today we're actually only going to talk about one species, and that is here, which is the red imported fire ant, RIFA. So across the world, this map shows you where insects, or these ants, have actually undergone an eradication campaign. So the dots that you see scattered across the map here are not necessarily where these ants are invading, but where there has been an eradication campaign. So you can see that Australia and New Zealand, traditionally, we've been doing a lot of eradication. And that's because we're particularly vulnerable to invasive species. These two species in particular are you can find them again in these hot spots, but I wanted to show you again here a little table that tells us a little bit about when and where we've recorded those two species. So yellow crazy ant, we've found in parts of the Northern Territory, Queensland and New South Wales, all states in Australia. And red imported fire ant, which we're going to talk about shortly, we've only found in Brisbane here in Queensland. So if you actually look at this map here, there at the top is the red fire ant. It's found its way all around the United States of America through Central America. It's understood it's originated from South America, and it's found its way over here to Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Asia. If we look at the yellow crazy ant, we believe it's originated from Africa, But this is an ant that's found its way again to many, many parts of the Pacific region, lots of these islands, Southeast Asia, parts of Australia, and India too also has a yellow crazy ant problem. So I really hope that India never ever has to deal with fire ant, which is up here. So yellow crazy ant is still a bit more easy to manage than red imported fire ant. So this is the actual activity that I want us to think about. And this is my way of bringing the outside into the classroom. I'm about to show you many, many different photos, some of which will evoke different emotions in you. And this is a team brainstorm. I don't think you need to write in the chat group because we will be flooded with responses, but maybe do a bit of critical thinking for yourself now. Each of these images tell us something about fire ant. Can you guess what they are? Okay, let's do a bit of critical thinking. So imagine you're in a class. Don't worry if you're not a biologist. If you look at the image, which are obviously a capture of the outside world brought into the classroom, what are we looking at here? So try and assign something to each photo that tells you exactly what this ant is doing when it's invasive. Okay, and in 1 minute, I'll reveal all the answers. Let's see how many you can get right. Some are a bit tricky, but this is deliberate. Okay, you have 30 more seconds. Okay, shall we have a bit of a discussion? So I actually like doing a lot of this in my own classrooms. You can have a very traditional lecturer if you like, or a traditional teacher that just tells you everything and anything. But if there's a way we can virtually bring some of the field into the classroom and get the students to actually think about it and what is actually showing here, because you remember that a picture, what does it do? It paints 1,000 words. So I really like a lot of imagery in my classroom. And I'm sure for a wide variety of topics and disciplines at high school, this is easy to achieve. Geography is easy to achieve. Mathematics, you can show lots of images on how, say, trigonometry would be applied in the real world setting, so on and so forth. So let's see how many of these you guys actually get correct. And I think this is also a good opportunity to learn a little bit more about these ants, because India, for example, has largely been protected, if you like, from this particular species. But, you know, with the way in which globalization is occurring and free trade, if we don't keep a good check on our borders, India might very well find this becoming a pest in the future. We know of lots of pest species that appear every year that different countries have no experience with. So most of these images are self-explanatory. Let me get my laser pointer out. Okay, here we go. So this one here is obvious. You all know, so this is a direct effect of an ant. They launch a very, very powerful bite and sting. Look, it's not enough that they bite you, they also want to sting you. Okay, so there's a physical and a chemical effect directly on people. You can see in this image here, what this image here is showing is how quickly these ants respond. If you step into a part of the nest, they will very, very quickly overwhelm your shoe or your boot, thinking that you are a predator trying to interfere with them. You can see, depending on your, I guess, how sensitive you are to these chemicals, they can oftentimes lead to very big issues with your skin, a reaction. You can see that they eat anything and everything. They're eating these lizards, they're eating baby chicks from birds. They cause a lot of ecological devastation. Before I tell you what this one is, which I hope won't won't make you feel too sad, but I wanted to show you this one here. They somehow absolutely love power boxes. So you know how our power lines, our technicians can go and check on them through power boxes. This particular species loves building their nests inside power boxes for some reason. And so they cause a bit of an issue, because if you were suffering a power outage because a fire ant colony has taken over a power box, it actually takes quite a substantial amount of time to get rid of them before your power is restored. Now, this image here, the very last image I wanted to share with you, that is actually the eye of a calf, so a baby cow. Because what happens is when these ants build these colonies underground, they typically occupy pasture land. And so when cows feed on the grass, the ants don't overwhelm the cows, they're too big, but the ants are spraying acid sometimes into their eyes, which can cause blindness. So you see, by using lots and lots of different images and getting the students to guess, put some easy ones in, but put some thought-provoking and challenging ones in as well. It's quite an effective way to learn, because dare I say, now you know a lot more about fire ants, and I'm pretty sure that if I speak to you all or met you all in person a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll still be able to tell me a thing or two about fire ants, especially if I asked you about how it affects cattle, okay? So that's one idea I have for you. The second idea is maybe a little bit more useful and something that you can implement if immediately, and that is being very thoughtful with what we call these cognitive verbs. These are typically the verbs that accompany the question that we're asking our students. It's the action word. And so it actually specifies to the student what exactly is expected of the student. Now, how we can be authentic about it is thinking very thoughtfully about which cognitive verb to use, relevant to what skills we'd like to assess. The QCAA is the official, I think yesterday I described this as like the CBSE equivalent, but for Queensland. So QCAA is the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority, and they take care of all of the ins and outs of education from, we do have kindergarten, but in Australia, but that's not formal education. We start education from a year called prep, into year 1 to year 6 primary, and then year 7 to year 12 is high school. So QCAA takes care of everything from prep to year 12. And we have, particularly for our senior students, categorized cognitive verbs that we use in exams into these 3 broad skill categories. So obviously you have your typical retrieval and comprehension. Basically, you know it or you don't. And then these other categories, analytical processes, is probably about 10, 20 years old. But knowledge utilization, we're seeing a lot more maybe in the last 5 to 10 years. So we categorize cognitive verbs into these 3 broad skill categories with the expectation that when a student sees this verb used in the question, the first thing they're able to do is they know what kind of skill they're being assessed upon, and then they know the appropriate response to give relative to those cognitive verbs. Any verb that appears here, and I'll show you the full list very shortly, any verb that appears here arguably is authentic assessment. But the trick is not to pigeonhole an exam. The trick is to ensure that an exam has a good balance of different questions with different cognitive verbs, all of which address each and every one of these skill sets. Now I'll show you the actual PDF, okay? So give me a moment. I will share with you the PDF, which is here. Okay, so this document I have put in the folder as well. So again, retrieval and comprehension, okay? Analytical processes and knowledge utilization. An easy way to think about this is Do you know or do you not know? Retrieval and comprehension. Analytical processes, can you solve? Very useful in science and mathematics, but also in other humanities where you give a student, say, a stimulus, a graph, and they're expected to say something about the trends, the patterns, or the relationships that they can identify. And then knowledge utilization is the apply. So this list gives you all of the cognitive verbs that are useful in addressing those skill sets. So all of the ones in this column for knowledge and retrieval, everything here for analytical processes, and everything in the last column for how they use their knowledge. So what we are starting to see at the primary school level here is that most of your exams or assessment will be clustered in category one. When we start middle school, year 7s going to year 9, we will start to have more of the analytical processes type cognitive verbs. And by the time they reach senior school year 10 to 12, then you'd expect a good half of the exam to be under this knowledge utilization category. So there is this graduation from, I guess, skill set to skill set, with the idea that students over time pick up more and more skills. So I thought it'd be a nice opportunity for us to look through some of these cognitive verbs in a bit more detail. And I wanted to show you how you can very, very easily make changes to your own exams that might improve, I guess, the students' ability to show you different skills. Okay, so we'll come back to my slide now. Give me a second, please. And yes, I'm definitely going to share that list. It's already in the folder. Okay, so I wanted to tell you something more about fire ants and then show you how I built an exam question a long time ago, and then how I would build that same exam question today. So we come back to fire ants. I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about insects. I can talk to you about insects 24/7. Okay, so red-imported fire ant Solenopsis invicta, like a lot of insects that undergo what we call complete metamorphosis, it's characterized by an immature stage, like the eggs and the larvae, that look very, very different from the final adult stage because they undergo metamorphosis, similar to your butterflies and your bees that do exactly the same thing. Ants also undergo complete metamorphosis. You see, this is the issue with fire ant. Because if it invades your country, it invades somewhere it's never been before, it's very difficult to actually realize you have fire ant, because fire ants occur in all of these body sizes. So what this means is you couldn't go out and tell people, oh, look for ants that are this color and this size, because fire ants could be anything from this small one, maybe about 2 millimeters across, all the way to maybe about 1 centimeter in length. And this here is the queen. So, you know, it's an issue lies with the control because it's difficult to identify this ant in the first place. So if it does eventually infect a country or a territory that it's never been at before, oftentimes it takes a while before people realize they have a fire ant problem. And by then, the fire ants might have really, really established themselves already. The other issue with fire ants is this very, very cool, I find it fascinating, feeding behavior. These are some workers tending to the queen. There is something that fire ants do that, that not all ant species do. And that is a very unique colony feeding system. What do I mean by this? In most ant colonies, the workers feed the queen. They go out, they gather resources, they bring the food back, they feed the queen. Fire ants do something else. Fire ants, the workers go out, they bring the food in, the workers eat the food first, and then regurgitate the food for the queen. So the workers actually digest the food for the queen, which maximizes her extraction of the nutrients from the food, maximizes her metabolism of the food. So the queen only eats on food that has been pre-digested by a worker. This is a cool feeding system. Okay, let me show you some exam questions now. I could ask a student this, a very traditional assessment style. Describe the colony feeding system in red imported fire ant. Now, I will show you that list again shortly, but if we go back to that 3 categories, describe sits in category 1, which is simply no or go. It's whether you have the knowledge and the ability to recall that knowledge or not, which is your very typical rote memory. That's not useful at all. In fact, that's a very, very low level form of thinking. It's not a higher order thinking level question at all. And that's because of the cognitive verb. So a traditional assessment style would be typically like this. If you remember your university days, chances are you had lots of questions that were like that. You either knew them or they are not. And oftentimes they were you simply regurgitating information that you had memorized from your lectures. It's still the case in many universities now, but we're really starting to shift that because high schools themselves are shifting their use of cognitive verbs. So again, a traditional assessment style is this, describe. So if the student simply describes to the effect of 3 marks, this is the colony feeding system. It's different from most ants. The workers will first process the food, regurgitate the food to feed the queen. Well, yeah, then the student gets 3 marks. Now, how can we transform a category 1 cognitive verb into something that elicits higher order thinking? So this is an example. So an authentic assessment style can be scenario-based. Those of you doing A-levels will know that you're starting to see a lot of such questions. IB as well, a lot of questions where a scenario is given and then the student expected to apply knowledge that they've learned in order to address the scenario. So see how this is an more authentic style. An outbreak of red imported fire ant has recently been reported. We can even change this to India. An outbreak, oh, this is bad grammar here. An outbreak of red imported fire ant has recently been reported in India. The council is proposing the use of ant bait to control the infestation. Appraise the effectiveness of this strategy. First, what's the cognitive verb? The cognitive verb is appraise, which is a higher order thinking cognitive verb. Because the ability of someone to appraise in the same way that you would go to a job appraisal is the ability of the student to evaluate strengths and weaknesses and then finally provide a conclusion. So the appraise cognitive verb must elicit that response in a student because it's a student's ability to evaluate what are the pros, what are the cons. But appraise doesn't stop there because if I wanted you just to give me pros and cons, then I would use the cognitive verb contrast, which is in the middle category. In the higher order thinking category, appraise is pros and cons, then give me a conclusion, okay? So you see here that what the student needs to do is they go, aha, so if you want to use ant bait, which means you want to feed them some poison, that's not going to work. That's not going to work because the workers eat the food first, so the workers will die from the poison before the poison ever gets to the queen, which is the same information you would have needed for the traditional assessment style, but in a more authentic sense. So they can evaluate, yes, the ant bait will work to a certain extent because you do kill workers, but what you don't kill are the reproductive individuals in the colony, which are the queens, because of the unique colony feeding system. And then give a conclusion, which is to the effect of, ultimately, this ant bait control mechanism might not work effectively. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea on how we can transform what is typically a very, very straightforward, traditional type of question into something that's a bit more applied simply by very thoughtfully using different cognitive verbs. I hope you found that slightly useful. So what I thought we'd do now is give you an activity. Those of you joining us who are not typically in the classroom. I know that a lot of principals are joining us. This is an optional activity, but those of you who would like to participate are more than welcome to join in and provide your responses through to me. So yesterday, I suggested for you to bring along 1 or 2 exam questions that you might have written before. I'd like to challenge you to rewrite that same exam question, but moving it from whatever category it's in now and moving it one up to the next category, or even if it's one of the categories here at the start, move it all the way to a knowledge utilization type category. So I request for you to spend about 5 minutes to do this. Please do not share your responses in the chat, because what we don't want is for the chat to get flooded with lots and lots of responses. Spend about 5 minutes to rewrite a question that you've done before, and then send both questions, the old question and the new question, to me via email. My email is going to be left on the screen, CHIAM_ANG@uq.edu.au. Please feel free to send me an email with your old question and your new question, and then I'm going to choose some examples to share with everyone. Okay, so please feel free to apply this changing the cognitive verb to your exam question now. Okay, we'll do this for about 5 minutes and then I'll start sharing. Maybe I should have brought some music. This is maybe another idea for everyone. So I oftentimes, when I interact with my students and give them an assignment and in class where they have 5 to 10 minutes to do it, I always have music. Not any music with words, because the students will start to sing, but it could be a bit of jazz, or it could be a little bit of classical. I always have music in my classroom when the students are being set a task. So sorry I didn't prepare that today. Okay, so I'm just going to keep an eye on my email through my phone. So please feel free to get in touch with your old question and your new question, and I will share that with everyone. Wow, already got something. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll just wait for a few more and then we can share some of them. Please send it via email. Thank you. Oh, amazing. Oh, and there's a math one. That's fantastic. Okay. I'm going to give everyone another 2 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a chat. And what I might do, I'll de-identify everyone. I'll put this all together in a Word document, and I'll also upload it to the repository, but I'll remove everyone's school and name. So I think that's appropriate. And so, yeah, I will put all of this, but I'm gonna pick a few because, oh goodness, there's so many and they're so good. And what I want to do is I want to pick a selection from different subjects. Okay, another minute or so. Oh, there's a geography one here. A literature one. Okay, I need to find. I did English literature as well when I was in high school. That was my other. I was probably going to go into that if I didn't go into science. Yeah, great. Oh, wow. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. So I think what I'll do is I'll come and join you so you can see me and I don't, you know, I'm not a stranger. Okay. And thank you all so much for your comments. There are so many of them in my inbox now, which is great. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. I'm going to go through maybe about 5 or so, because I think you get the gist of it and hopefully agree with me that, you know, what we want to develop in our students is an authentic learning experience, because nobody is in the future going to ever ask them about, you know, describe this or define this, you know, or identify this, because most of the time people are interested in your opinion. You know, what can you conclude? You know, what are your thoughts about something like that? So those higher order thinking type questions are really, really useful here in eliciting some of those responses. So there is I'll start with the literature one because I had to go look for it. And thank you very much to the person who sent this in. So what we see here is, it's a little interesting, okay, this particular question, and I'll read it to you first. Based on the opening chapter of The Mayor of Casterbridge, so this is the book, so the question is, generate an argument to justify the behavior of the protagonist. Now, this is interesting because here there are 2 verbs used in this question, but only one is a cognitive verb. So the question is, generate an argument to justify the behavior of the protagonist. So generate is a verb, justify is a verb, but the cognitive verb is justify, because that's what the student is expected to do. The generate an argument part is the evidence that supports their justification. So I guess there's good and bad, right? So I would say that a question like this, so typically we would be encouraging our teachers to use only one verb, so it's very, very clear, but that's not always possible. That's not always possible. So we do need to train our students to be able to identify the correct cognitive verb. Okay, let's pick on another one. So this one is an economics question. So an old question from the category 1 is to the effect of, explain the impact of increase in direct tax rate on the market of apples or any commodity. Explain the impact of increasing direct tax rate on the market of apples. A new question that transitions from category 1, in this case, to this cognitive verb used here is examine, which I believe is a category 2 or 3. Okay, I think it's category 2. So this is the new question. Under the government budget in 2020, the government of India has increased the tax rate based on the income of individuals. Examine the impact of the same on the market equilibrium of apples. So I like it because you have a context that the students can relate to, which is great, which is an actual policy on taxation in India that maybe has recently been described or announced. And then you expect them to apply the same principles to something else like apples. Oh, wonderful. And the cognitive verb here is examine. Fantastic. Okay, so let me just pick another 2. Okay, here's a physics one. Okay, here's a physics one. An old style question is as simple as define heat conductivity. Define heat conductivity. That's easy. But how about a new style? And the new style is the hot part of an electric iron is made up of metal. Context. The hot part of an electric iron is made up of metal. Appraise the property of metals that make it suitable for this purpose. Wow. Okay, so again, it's the same knowledge, because in the old question, define heat conductivity, the student can do that, right? But for this new question, the student needs to take that knowledge and apply it. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, maybe I'll find another one. And don't worry, there's so many here, which is fantastic. And now you all have my email address, and so we can keep in touch. But I'm going to put all of this together in one document and share it with everyone. Oh, there's one on English. So I want to be fair for everyone, right? Go through a little bit of different things. So, and a question for the English exam. Okay, the old question is, describe the character of the grandmother. Oh, this is maybe English literature as well. Okay, describe the character of the grandmother. This is a traditional way of asking. 2, this is the new question. The grandmother in the story is a strong and likable character. Okay, so we give this is not necessarily context as much as it is, what's the term that we call it? Oh my goodness, this is not a context, because this is stuff that the student already knows. So it's not context because it's not new to the student, but what it is a what I think we sometimes like to call as a primer, okay? So mention the qualities that you like best and what values you have learned from her. Nice, okay? So I really like this one. Maybe one final one, just so we give everyone more, lots of different ideas. Oh, I like this one. For those of you in primary school, we will give you an example sent from a primary school teacher. So this sounds to me like earth sciences in primary school, or related to earth sciences. And there's also, this is fantastic. Okay, 2 of them here. So primary school typical question, explain the cause and effect of an earthquake. Explain the cause and effect of an earthquake. However, if you revise this, it could be investigate the cause and effect of an earthquake based on past events or casualties in the world. So explain is turned into investigate, inquiry based. Okay, mathematics. Solve 345 plus 3,456. Okay, instead of that, it could be create a mind map or an illustration to show the addition of 345 plus 3,456. So not only do they need to give you the right answer and solve it, but they need to show you a systematic way of presenting that information. That is fantastic. That is fantastic. Now I'm going to put all of this, all of your submissions into a Word document because they're all absolutely fantastic. So what's really, really clear to me is that came very naturally to you all because you're all teachers, right? You all write exams because you know the ins and outs of assessment and the curriculum. But hopefully it gives you some opportunity to see how you can develop even more broad skill sets while still achieving the same learning outcomes as before. Hopefully some of that was useful to you all. So I guess I'm going to wrap things up very quickly now. Today, we considered authentic assessment as a real opportunity for students to, really apply themselves and the knowledge. And I will say that having worked with so many teachers here in Australia and mapping the journey from high school to university at UQ, I just know that when we give them more authentic assessment, their transition to university is going to be a lot smoother. More and more people will study at a university, and so I dare say that these are things that we can do with our students that will really make things a lot easier for them. In terms of how we would do authentic assessment, I gave you two ideas today. The first of which is including powerful imagery in your classroom and activities which get them to look at an image and say something about it, because the learning is far more effective than if you just gave them the information straight away. I think teenagers, children are naturally inquisitive and curious people. So if you can stimulate them visually with imagery and get them to apply that inquisitivity or that curiosity to the stimulus, they'll learn a lot more. And then, of course, we can also use cognitive verbs very, very thoughtfully. So there is one final quiz for today, and this link again will be available through the slides that you can download from the bit.ly link, which everybody should have by now and which we will put in the chat group very, very shortly. And I wanted to tell you again a little bit more about tomorrow. So I'll try and get through as many questions today, but tomorrow we will put all of this into a big summary. And more importantly, I wanted to give you a framework by which you can consider evaluating your practice. And what are some criteria that you can meet in order to maybe improve upon your current understanding of teaching and learning. What I also wanted to share with you all tomorrow is maybe those of you in high school, but don't feel like it's limited to just high school teachers. Because you're senior educators, you may be in a position to get involved in your own community as a teaching and learning scholar. So I wanted to give you some suggestions for your own professional development, and that can include you publishing some of your work in peer-reviewed journals. I wanted to talk to you about that tomorrow, and also how you can find ways to lead the charge in your own community by providing an opportunity for the young teachers to better themselves. And I think many of you as senior educators need to lead the way in that. Australia, for example, we need a lot of teachers. So we're actually desperately looking for teachers, and over the next 5 to 10 years, Australia will need 30,000 teachers across all age groups. And so, hopefully we can start building a scholarship of teaching and learning together. Awesome. Thank you very much again. And now is a good time for questions. So I'm going to quickly now, you will see a little poll that's on the screen in front of you. May we please request for you to give us your honest opinion about today's masterclass, whether it was extremely helpful, very helpful, somewhat helpful, not so helpful, or not at all helpful. Okay, don't worry, it's anonymous, so I won't get offended. Okay, so I'm also at the same time going to put the link for the resources in the chat group. Okay, the UQ 2020. So please copy and paste this link that we've just put into your web browser. And again, it will open up a folder with all of the slides, all of the resources. So please maybe save that into your favorites so you can come back to it again. You download the slides, and then within the slides, there is the specific link for the quiz. But what I will do now, if you give me a moment, is I will actually also put today's quiz link. Quiz 3. Okay, quiz 3. I'm just going to put quiz 3 now into the chat. Okay, so quiz 3 is in the chat at the moment. So if you wanted to click on it and then leave it there for a bit. Okay, so we are out of time, but I'm going to take some questions. Anaga, did you think you wanted to moderate again, or did you just prefer if I went through all the questions on the Q&A?
I'm happy to ask you a few, Dr. G, but if you want to be looking at them just in case, you want to answer something specifically, we can do them both.
Sounds, I think maybe if you ask me maybe 2 or 3 questions, I think that would be enough for today. And then anything else we can maybe address tomorrow.
Okay. Okay, I see one here. It says students should be given an exposure of all cognitive verbs before they start attempting exam style questions. Is that right?
Yeah, so you have to ease them in, right? You can't overwhelm them. This is the list of cognitive verbs. You need to know everything, right? Or you need to know which cognitive verbs elicit what response. Fortunately, for the way in which we run stuff here in Australia, that same list is applied for every subject. So if science asks you to explain something, if humanities asks you to explain something, if geography or arts or music asks you to explain something, the response needs to be the same. So if a student sees the cognitive verb, regardless of the subject matter, they know exactly what to do. So that's one benefit of the way we work here, which is not necessarily the way the universities work, because, science and appraise in science might be a different appraise if you go to health or to business or to economics or law. But at school, at least, it's the same. Okay, so what we do a lot of in school is we have, of course, the opportunity for teachers in classroom to put up these cognitive verbs on their notice boards. So very, very typically, you visit any school in Queensland, it's not uncommon for you to find all of these cognitive verbs very, very clearly indicated all over classroom walls, corridor walls, notice boards, and they give the cognitive verb and the definition of the cognitive verb. And so it's in and out, it's in the psyche of our students all through middle school and high school. Okay.
Thank you for that, Dr. G. I have one more here that says, in the authentic assessment style of questions, how would you spread out a 3-mark question, and what criteria would you be looking for in the case of the red ants that you spoke about?
Yeah, okay, that is a great question. And obviously that's a university level. And I guess at university, it's not as structured as, say, at high school, where, if your national board exams, your external exams, when you all mark, there is a very, very fixed marking scheme that you need to use, which is for university that doesn't exist. So specifically for the 3-mark question, for the ants one, I would be, because it's an appraised cognitive verb, I would be looking 1 mark for 1 mark for pro, 1 mark for con, and 1 mark for conclusion that is a logical extension of the pros and cons that have been previously identified. So 1 pro, 1 con, 1 conclusion for the 3 marks. Having said that, when we look at the way in which those category 1, 2, and 3 questions are being asked in our exams here in Australia, in terms of the divide, you actually find a good 25% of questions in an exam in category 1, which is just knowledge and retrieval, 25% in category 2, which is analytical, and 50% of the questions in the 3rd category, which is apply knowledge, okay? So, excuse me. So that's the balance. So that's the balance in terms of the number of questions per category. Second is the marks. If you redesign it and look at, okay, if it's a category 1 question, how many marks get awarded there? Category 2 question, how many marks get awarded there? Because of course, you know that you can ask questions up to 8 marks. So here in Australia, the largest questions can only be 8 marks. 8 marks is the largest questions. And of course, the lowest is 1 mark. If you revise that, right? So remember I told you 25 for category 1, 25% category 2, 50% for category 3. That's a number of questions. But if we look at mark allocation relative to those, category 1 suddenly becomes about 10%, category 2 about 20%, and a good chunk, so 70% of the marks. So 50% of the questions category 3, but 70% of the marks category 3.
Thanks for that, Dr. G. I'm just going to try to merge 3 questions at once, and this can be the last question. Firstly, these are the verbs from Robert Marzano. Is that correct? The cognitive verbs.
Yeah. So it's an adaptation. So it is absolutely an adaptation. So Bloom is, regarded as a very, very, in terms of the pedagogy and teaching and learning space, Bloom has done a lot of work, right? But Bloom primarily is a child psychologist type kind of work. Marzano, I believe, came a little bit later. But this is a good mix. This is a good mix of a bit of everything. And it's also included maybe a few things in consultation with universities in Australia. So that list is a bit of everything. And unfortunately, that particular document doesn't necessarily reference where they came from, but it's what we use here in Queensland.
Okay, and what's the difference between a verb and a cognitive verb? And do you think that this needs to be explained to the children before we actually use it in, putting forward questions?
Yeah, great question. So obviously a verb, as you can imagine, is any action word. A cognitive verb is a verb that elicits a very, very specific response in writing. In other words, and that's of course used in an educational sense, meaning to say that the cognitive verb is the verb that a student should use and they go, aha, it is an explain, aha, it is a solve, aha, it is an appraise, it's a contrast. And then that needs to elicit a very, very specific style in the way that they respond, which is also why we bring it back to when we design questions that oftentimes we are encouraged as exam designers to use only one cognitive verb, because what we don't want is multiple verbs that can be confused and then the student is a bit lost. So typically we would only find one verb in a question anyway, and that one verb is the cognitive verb.
And just to end it, Dr. G, could you give us one example of a cognitive verb?
So any of those cognitive verbs are on that list are very, very useful, but it's not my own example, but I want to bring it back to the very, very first example we shared from all of you a while ago that had 2 cognitive verbs, which was generate an argument to justify blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you see how in that situation, there were actually 2 verbs, generate and justify, generate and justify. So that might confuse a student, but the cognitive verb is actually justify, because that is what we're assessing on. The generate an argument is simply for the student to support their justification. So any in that list that is available to you is our cognitive verbs. Now there are some verbs on there you couldn't use in an exam. You will see that one verb is understand. How do you ask a question with understand? Because you would say something like demonstrate your understanding. You wouldn't say understand blah blah blah. That's not a question. Okay, so those are cognitive verbs which elicit very, very specific responses, but know that not all of them can be used in a question setting, but they're there on that list because those are verbs again that appear in the syllabus. So it's a multi-purpose list. It can be used for questions, but it can also start the subject matter in the syllabus. So for example, if for biology, for example, if the subject matter is understand DNA replication and understand DNA replication and protein synthesis. So if that is the cognitive verb there, then again, the student needs to be able to undergo specific thought processes. But of course, we can't use understand in a question, doesn't make sense. But what you would say is you could say describe, because that falls in under understanding or contrast.
Thanks, Dr. G. I know I said the previous question would be the last one, but I have one more that I think is important that you address. How would you go about, using these with questions that have diagrams?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? So typically when you have a stimulus, you oftentimes will find that because it already takes the student so much time to get through a stimulus, what you don't want to do is you don't want to just give them 1 mark for one question. So many times when there's a stimulus, you often find that is a structured question, part A, part B, part C. Because you have part A, part B, part C, what you can do is then just ask a question about part A could be identify. So it could be identify the time at which growth is stagnant, and then they read off the graph and they tell you the time. Then part B could be what's a good word? Predict the biological processes that influence the plateau, at where growth is stagnant. See, so it's structured that way. Part A is a category 1 question, but part B, which maybe I give 2 to 3 marks, is a category 2 or 3 question. So graphs are great. In fact, I love questions with stimuli in them. Here in biology, I'll very quickly, and I don't want to waste everybody's time, but I just wanted to take the opportunity. Give me a second. I'll show you an example of maybe the most challenging question in our biology exam for our year 12. And it gives you an idea of how a stimulus can be also translated to higher order thinking. Give me 2 seconds for me to find the correct slide. Where would I have put it? I think this is a good one. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just looking for the slide before I share it. No, not this one. Thank you all for your patience. I think I'll find it in here. How come I can't find it? It's just so bizarre. Okay, give me a second. Oh, actually, I know exactly where it is. Thank you. I just reminded myself where it is and I have found it. Okay, give me a second, everyone, and thank you for your patience. This question is here. Okay. I'm just going to scroll to the correct question. Oh, why has it disappeared? Okay, so I do apologize. I simply cannot find it. Would you believe? But I'll tell you what it looks like. It's a graph. Actually, I know what I can do. Sorry, I'm beating around the bush at the moment. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just open up the paper that I took this from. So this is a question. Where is that paper now? That paper is right here, Morgan et al. Okay, I will share this with you all. So one thing we do a lot of in Australia now is this, when we talk about authentic questions, we've been giving them stimulus from actual scientific papers. So a good example, so this is a paper on Hox genes, but all I wanted to show is I would take, say, in an exam, where did it go? Where's that figure gone? I would take, say, this graph here. I'll zoom in. Okay. I would take this graph here. Okay. This graph here. And the question would be, this diagram or this graph shows the outcome of a biotechnology experiment looking at the survival of cells exposed to different hormones. Appraise these data to determine the success of this experiment, 8 marks. So this would be a typical higher order thinking question that would probably be the most challenging question in that exam, where we would actually extract something that's authentic and get the students to appraise it. Okay, sorry it took so long to get there, but that I wanted to actually show you what that might look like. Awesome. So thank you all very much again. I hope you got something out of this. I'm looking forward to our very, very last masterclass tomorrow. It'll be bittersweet. Thank you all for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Ravi?
Hey, Dr. G, what a fantastic session. I mean, I'm not an academician, but I think, I should have opted for teaching. Basis. If I had a mentor like you. Thank you very much for a fantastic session. I may have a few things to share. After every masterclass, we receive a lot of emails. So we all are educators. We are not going to email today anything to each other. My colleague very shortly is going to share a few very important things in terms of whatever you guys ask us in the chat box. So please stop typing in the chat box. I know you all want to thank Dr. G. Number one, we are sharing the quiz link, quiz 1, quiz 2, and quiz 3. Vinay, can you please share those links in the chat box? Okay, so the entire information, which is a very important information, link to quiz 1, link to quiz 2, link to quiz 3 is there in your chat box. Please copy it. The program resources, that means the master folder where all the presentations go every day, is also there in the chat box. The link is there. Dr. G's email ID is there, Vinay? Yeah, Dr. G's email ID is there in the chat box. And finally, the YouTube links of first masterclass, second and third masterclass are there if you want to go back and take a reference from. Also, please note, all of you who will fill all these 3 quizzes will be eligible for a certificate from University of Queensland, which is not a very easy thing to get. I mean, it's a world top 50 university. So please fill in all your quizzes, and it is Dr. G's he will tell us, how many quizzes were filled in, basis that, we will issue the certificates from them. And I think, I request all of you once again, before you log off, to go in your chat box and copy this and paste it in a Word document so that you can refer to it later on. Thank you very much, Dr. G. If you would want to say a few words before we end the meeting.
I just wanted once again to thank everybody for their time and enthusiasm and participation today. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Dr. G, how long is the final masterclass for tomorrow? We start at 11 o'clock, and what time do we finish? So that they can calendars?
Yeah, sure. So is the Trade Commissioner going to start or going to close?
That is something that we need to check. But again, even if Gitesh is coming, he's not going to take more than 5 minutes.
Okay, may I suggest then that tomorrow what we might do is maybe spend the first 10 minutes doing the summation. Maybe Gitesh can close. I will need about 10 minutes to talk to the teachers about the framework and evaluating their practice. And then if the teachers that are busy and have other things to do can leave, but the rest of the time to get through all of your questions.
Perfect. So we all meet at 11 o'clock, and thanks to all of those who came a little early and they got a chance to speak to Dr. G about yesterday's masterclass. So if you all want to come tomorrow a little early, I'll request Dr. G to spend another 15 minutes from 10:45 to 11 o'clock to kind of answer your queries for today's masterclass. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A fantastic day ahead, and see you all tomorrow.